Okay. Okay, we are live. Welcome, Tilen Genov. Thank you for coming to the podcast Spark.
Thank you for
Um,
having me.
and I would ask you if you can introduce yourself shortly.
I'm Tilen Genov. I'm from Slovenia. I'm by training and by occupation, I'm primarily a marine biologist and marine conservation biologist. And my primary field has to do with marine mammals, specifically whales and dolphins. So my main work involves everything around research and conservation of marine mammals.
How did you discover this passion for mammals, marine mammals, and especially cetaceans?
I guess I was always quite interested from a very young age about interested in wildlife generally, and then by luck I was kind of spending my summer vacations on an island on a Croatian island in the Adriatic called Lošinj because I have relatives living there. And that's also the place where Italian researchers started the first research on dolphins in the Adriatic. They started that back in the 80s, and so when I was kind of spending my time there, I learned about their work and I got involved. And then from that kind of grew into something more serious. And then because I'm from Slovenia and not much was really known about dolphins in Slovenia, I started looking into that, and here we are.
Nice. And you also studied in abroad in St. Andrews University for marine mammals, right? You did your master's there. Why did you decide to go there to do the
Well,
master's?
St. Andrews has so-called sea mammal research unit, which is probably the biggest unit as a such at any European place. So it's a biggest collection, let's say, of marine mammal scientists working in one place, and it's one of the leading centers for marine mammal research globally. And because they were organizing a master's course, master of research course in marine mammal science there, it was kind of a very obvious place for me to go. So yes, I finished my master's there, and later on I also completed my PhD also at the same university.
And did this open any door for you in the further research and your work?
It definitely did. So like literally any opportunity anywhere, it tends to open new doors, new connections, new skills, new knowledge, and yeah, it definitely opened up quite a few doors, probably more than I can think of immediately. But yes, absolutely.
And how long was it, the master's and the PhD afterwards?
Well, the master's itself was a 1 year, highly intensive master's. So I actually lived in Scotland for a year.
Mhm.
PhD was a bit of a different story because I did my PhD in a way remotely, or at least I wasn't based in St. Andrews because I was also working at the university here in Slovenia. My field site, my study population is here. So I was basically based here and coming to St. Andrews every now and again. And for various reasons, also my PhD took longer than normal PhDs probably would, for a bunch of reasons, including having a full-time job here, as well as the COVID pandemic. So the PhD, I guess, in total lasted something like 6 or 7 years, but this includes the off time and leave of absence, etc.
Okay. And what was your topic on the PhD?
So my topic was population ecology, behavior, and conservation of bottlenose dolphins here in the Gulf of Trieste and neighboring waters in the North Adriatic.
So basically, we're really lucky to have the dolphins also here in Slovenia.
I think we are, yes, because when we started out our work here, the general perception, even among biologists, was that these animals are not found here, and when they are, that it's occasional or relatively rare occurrence. So when we started looking into this, we had no idea what to expect, and if this would even be fruitful. But yeah, through time, we actually discovered that this place hosts a resident dolphin population that lives here year round. We now know some of these animals for more than 20 years individually, so we know who they are. We gave them names to be able to refer to them in our databases, and they all have their personalities and their way of behavior. And now I can say we know a fair deal about this population, and we knew literally zero when we started.
But that is quite extensive work that you can actually recognize personalities from a dolphin. So it has to be a lot of time involved, a lot of field work to get such data.
It is. It spent a lot of time both in the field and staring into the photographs and data and numbers. And it's, in one hand, also, we as scientists tend to, detach ourselves from the systems we study. We try to be objective as possible. But at the same time, it's still very subjective as well, because you go out in the field and you see these dolphins, and it's literally like seeing old friends. So there's also that component, and we can identify these animals based on their natural markings on their dorsal fins. This is the part of the body that is typically always visible when the animal comes to the surface to breathe. And then it's also the body part which is quite exposed. So when they interact with each other, either through playful interactions or through fights, they bite each other, and then these fins acquire different nicks and notches and scars and injuries, which for us allows us to identify them and tell them apart.
So basically, through photo ID, when you take pictures of dorsal fins, you can identify them.
Exactly, yeah. Because we take photographs, it's called photo identification, because we use the photographs to identify individuals. And this is quite a standard method in many places around the world for studying whales and dolphins. It's a relatively simple method because it doesn't require you to capture the animals, you can just photograph them. But at the same time, it's very powerful because we can learn many, many things through photo ID. Based on that, we can know how many animals live in an area, what their social structure is, what their fecundity or reproductive rates are, and many other things.
I have been asked this question a lot about how do we know where the whales and dolphins migrate, and if we do also GPS trackings on them. I would love to hear from you about this topic.
So this varies a lot by species, and I would say we know already quite a great deal, but at the same time, there's still massive amounts of stuff that we don't know. And the information comes from various sources, let's say. One of these sources is the photo ID that we just discussed, and this works the same in different species of whales. And depending on species, you might use different body parts to identify them. So, for example, in humpback whales or sperm whales, we would typically use tail flukes to identify them. Although you can also use dorsal fins as an additional body mark or body part. So part of knowing how these whales migrate just comes from photo ID, because researchers studying them in the feeding grounds around the North or the South Pole have taken photographs of them, recorded data meticulously, and then through collaborative efforts and comparing and matching photographs with other researchers, for example, those working in the tropics, we then can actually determine if the same whales were seen in different places, which tells us about their movement patterns. But then the other way of assessing their movements is also through satellite tracking, like you already mentioned, in which specific specialized devices are placed on the animals. There's a variety of methods how you can do that. But basically, devices are placed on the animals, and they are linked with the satellite, and they can actually transmit their location and tell us how these animals are moving. This is, of course, also both very useful because it provides us information what otherwise wouldn't be able to get. But at the same time, there are limitations because you can only tag a certain number of whales in a given period. and the tags will not last forever. They will fall off, and the batteries will also run out of juice. So yeah, but these are the two principal ways by which we know how whales move. And then just information on sightings and the records also kind of feeds into that whole idea of where animals are and where they move. But like I said, there's still a great deal of unknowns. There are some populations of whales or even species that we still don't really know very well where they reproduce, for example. So there's lots of question marks out there still.
Mm. I was also working with Husavik Research Center and also in Azores. And it was really cool because when I was working in Iceland, we had some whales that came there to feed that they were seen before in Azores. And like just thinking of the whale, the way that they traveled, it was amazing.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah.
these animals actually undertake some of the longest migrations on Earth. There are quite a few examples now, mainly actually detected through photo ID of animals moving, more than 8,000 kilometers in one direction and then returning, or even recently animals moving between oceans. So animals originally found in the Western South Atlantic, then being found in the Indian Ocean, and so on.
Okay, interesting. I thought they were bound to like special areas like the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and that they don't um, migrate.
Generally, they are bound to. Generally, we do have specific populations that tend to be quite discrete in terms of their breeding ranges, and then they all tend to meet in the feeding ranges. Uh, but then some animals occasionally do go out of the out of the out of the mold, so to say, and do something very unexpected. And we actually see this in our dolphins as well. We often think of dolphins as being, or at least bottlenose dolphins, being quite resident, quite faithful to an area, having strong site fidelity. But then the question is this truly their habitat use, or is this just an artifact of our habitat use as researchers, because we inevitably are limited in how far we can go with boats. We tend to have, certain bases like we have here in Piran. So that in itself dictates which area you're kind of covering. So what we see in bottlenose dolphins is that it is true that they're mainly very faithful to specific areas, but we have a dolphin that we encountered here just off of Piran that was seen before that half a Mediterranean Sea away, north of Sicily, and then after it was seen here, it migrated, or moved rather, all the way to the Western Ligurian Sea on the border of Italy and France, which is more than 2,000 kilometers of movement, and was actually the longest ever recorded movement of a bottlenose dolphin in the Mediterranean Sea, and basically worldwide if you discount certain offshore animals.
And what would be the like reasons for such a long migration for a bottlenose dolphin?
We would need to ask them, I'm afraid. We can only speculate. What we do know about this particular animal is that it used to be resident in the Aeolian archipelago in north of Sicily. And there is some evidence that the dolphin population there has been declining. So this particular dolphin was not seen there for quite a few years before we encountered it here. And our colleagues working there, they presumed it was dead. They presumed it passed away. And then it turned up here twice in 1 month. And then only 6 months later, it was again on a different part of the Mediterranean. And it's very hard to speculate why that was. Our colleagues from Italy speculated that the prey resources were diminishing in the original study area. So that may have contributed to the animal moving elsewhere. It may also be in search of mates. It's very, very difficult to know what the motivation of these animals are.
But the lack of prey would be maybe because of overfishing, or something
Potentially,
else.
that was one of the hypotheses that our colleagues made, the overfishing or the general degradation of the environment. But of course, this is again something very, very difficult to track, because all systems are complicated, and the marine ecosystems are that much more complicated to study than on land.
Yeah. So, what do you think it's a ticket in this world of marine biology research and cetacean research?
You mean for like people or students or young people who would like to get into this field?
Yes.
My suggestion, based on my own, let's say, experience, which might not be the same for everyone, is curiosity and persistence, and gathering experience, gathering knowledge, and networking, basically. I was very lucky that as I said, I happened to spend a lot of time in a place where researchers happen to be. Through a little bit of luck, but also annoying perseverance, I kind of stuck my foot in the door, so to say. And some of these people are now my friends and colleagues, but they will tell you that I was a very annoying kid with too many questions in the past. So that's part of it. But I spent a lot of time volunteering and attending different projects for free. I know this is not always possible for everyone, and it really depends on the project, on the location, on whether you have any money available to do some work and not get paid. So it varies a lot. But this definitely helped me both expanding my skill base, my knowledge base, but also my network base. So, and then conferences. We earlier touched a little bit on the conference that is happening in just over a month. In my experience, these are an excellent opportunity to learn, to meet people, and to see what opportunities there are. But outside of that, I would say that the exact path that people can take can be very different. People often assume that they need to study marine biology to do this. That's not necessarily the case. I started studying general biology, not specializing in marine biology, and then went on from there. So, yeah, I think that the formal level of education is probably less relevant in this case than acquiring skills and expertise and experience.
So basically, experience, you would say, that are highly recommended.
Yeah, this is not always to diminish the formal education, of course. I mean, that also plays obviously a very important role. But my point was just that you're not going to be bound and stuck in a given field just because you started studying some topic or some course. Especially nowadays, it's very easy to also switch fields in a way or expand fields. So that was my point.
Yeah, yeah. And could you maybe, in a nutshell, tell us your way from starting in biology up to now?
So, well, my work with dolphins kind of started before I was a student, through being a kid with lots of questions and asking researchers to join them in the field. So I was very lucky that they actually did take me out on the boat with them a few times, which they generally tended not to do because I was still a kid, basically. And from that, I started helping out with various stuff, including education and public awareness activities. So I became part of the team. But after that, when I started studying biology, yes, so I finished the undergrad studies of biology, which at that time was still this pre-Bologna system, which meant 4 full years of studies and then another year for the thesis. We still call that undergraduate, although now it's evaluated as equal to a European master's. So throughout this time, I was working on the NGO that I founded, on Morigenos, the Slovenian Marine Mammal Society. Once I finished my studies, I went immediately on to do the master's in St. Andrews. Again, I was still involved in stuff that we were doing here in terms of research and education activities and so on. And then I got a job at the University of Primorska here in Slovenia, in Koper, and at the same time enrolled in a full-time PhD in St. Andrews, which is not necessarily something I recommend to people. Probably don't have a full-time job and a full-time PhD at the same time, at least if they are not directly related. And yeah, as I said, it took me a bit longer to finish my PhD for various reasons. And I'm now, well, in the meantime, I left University of Primorska for various reasons, but I have since came back as an assistant professor. So I teach two courses on the postgraduate level in the study program called Nature Conservation.
Mhm.
And that's kind of it in a nutshell, I guess. But of course, there was a lot of intricacies and other details in the meantime, and lots of other projects ongoing, both for us here at Morigenos and other work done elsewhere in the world. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, I guess. But I'm happy to expand on any part if you want.
Um, First, congratulations on a PhD, because I know that it could be really hard to do it while you're still in a job. So,
Thank you. Yes, its ups and downs, but in retrospect, I probably wouldn't change anything. It was still a learning experience one way or another.
mm. And what would you say that it was a needle mover for you in this journey?
Uh, Probably the main one, I guess, was back when I was a kid, because the whole thing started by, uh, in a way, by a fun joke, let's say. I don't know if you ever had those as a kid, but there's these like little like capsules, like pills. They look like medicine tablets, and you put them in warm water, and then there's like a spongy small animal that dissolves out of them because of this layer of like a layer holding the capsule basically dissolves, and then you have this nice little
Yeah, yeah,
um,
I know that.
foamy animals. We were on that island of Loshin that I was referring to earlier, with my parents and some family friends. And they were joking like, oh, Tilen needs to take his medicine. And we took this little pill, put it in water. And that set had a number of different animals that could form out of that, right? There were, I think, seals and dolphins and sharks, and I think maybe even turtles and some fish. So you never knew what would come out. But at that point, a dolphin came out, and our family friends say, "Oh, do you like dolphins?" And I was like, "Yeah, I like dolphins." And then they said, "Okay, we'll finish this drink, and we'll take you somewhere to see something." So they took me to this research station where these Italian researchers were running this project, to come there and to learn about the project basically. And I think that was probably the defining point, which then in the end led to all of this in a way. So I
Okay,
would say if there was a needle moving point in my life, it was probably that.
that is a cool story. Okay, and why did you decide to start your own society, Morigenos? So, Slovenian Marine Mammal Society.
Well, at the time, I was getting more and more serious, helping out the guys in Croatia. But at the same time, it became very obvious that there is nothing really known about dolphins here in Slovenia and in these waters generally. So the idea was kind of to both, and on one hand, try to increase awareness activities in Slovenia for the project in Croatia. That was part of the reasoning, but also trying to see, what about out here? Do we have any of these animals? Like, if yes, try to find out more. If not, try to determine why they're not here. Um, and that's why it kind of started. And at least at the time, it seemed that the easiest way to do that would be to form an NGO, a society, and take it from there, basically.
Okay, and how did this track of Morigenos? How did this becoming Morigenos what it was then and what it is now look like? Because back then probably there was not that much understanding and how this, yeah, from government and from other people.
Yeah, there was there was no really, yeah, you're right, there was a lot of there was lack of understanding,
Mm.
or lack of even seeing why even you would do this, because like I said, the general perception was that these animals are relatively rare here. People do recall them back in the past, like 30-40 years ago, that they used to see them as kids.
Mhm.
uh, but then something apparently either changed or people no longer saw them for whatever reason, so the perception was that they were not here. And I've had in the past people literally laughing in my face when I would tell them I'm studying or trying to study the dolphins here, and they were like, "What? There are no dolphins here. What are you talking about?" Uh, so the Morigenos story definitely evolved quite dramatically from what it was at the beginning to what it is now. It started it started all voluntary. For the first 10 years of Morigenos existence, all of us were completely voluntary. There was nobody getting paid for any of our work.
Mhm.
The Our knowledge was, of course, limited because we were just starting out. Our funding was non-existent. Basically, our equipment was highly limited. It was basically my own camera that I got for my 18th birthday, and a pair of binoculars from my grandfather, and that was it. We were using land-based observation points. We were trying to figure out which of the points were best to use that for. Uh, I would hitchhike to the coast or take a train, and later on, when I could drive, I would drive. We were staying at various places, either uh, staying at somebody's weekend place, or I remember sleeping on somebody's boat once, or staying in a hostel. um, and then bit by bit we gathered more knowledge, partly through conferences and projects that I mentioned before. We slowly got some funding. It was really peanuts at the beginning, but it helped kind of get us going slowly with, paying for some boat fuel, or a better camera or a GPS and things like that. We also got, bit by bit, we got not only experience but new information as we were collecting data. It started piling up eventually. Uh, Information or the data were very few and far in between at the beginning because it was very difficult to collect any data. We didn't have a boat. Most of the work was shore based, or harassing some fishermen to take us out occasionally. Um, but then we were also lucky because there were a few individuals here and there that really had a very different approach, that did support us, not necessarily financially, but in other means, by offering some sort of connections, or helping with something here or there, or taking us out on a boat. So it was small bits and pieces, small pieces of the puzzle. And eventually our science, of course, grew to a better level. We all got more experience, more knowledge, more formal education. Our methods of work improved, our amount of data improved, our track record, both in research and in education, kind of grew. So we went from that, from a very, what you call grassroots organization, from literally zero, to now being a serious institution that has different projects. We have at the moment 6 people employed full time, and yeah, I think our colleagues abroad perceive us as an established institution that does good science and good research, and good conservation work. But it started from very, very basic stuff, yeah, and lots of enthusiasm.
But it's amazing story how you can basically with zero funds and zero equipment build this. So really nice to hear that. And what do you think the impact of Morigenos is nowadays?
Well, sometimes it's hard to judge that, but we hope that, and we are striving to make an impact in a number of ways. So one of them is scientific. Science has always been a major part of our work, one of the major pillars of our work, so to say. So part of the impact that we do is simply based on the knowledge that we produce and also the research publications that we've published. And some of them are, let's say, very general. So using existing methodology and finding out something new about the local system, which is not necessarily new on a global scale, but it's new, it's new information about how many dolphins live here particularly. So this is definitely one of these impacts that we now know that Slovenia and this region has a regular dolphin population that lives here, which was not known before. And this is important, I think, because it shows that our biodiversity is more than what we thought before. It's actually a good thing to have a population of a top predator in the marine system, because we know this is overall good for the marine ecosystems. The same on terrestrial ecosystems. You need healthy populations of large predators for that. So this was one thing. Then we also discovered some things which were unexpected, but were interesting globally for marine mammal science. For example, we kind of established a novel method of identifying dolphins by facial features, so using faces and not just dorsal fins. So this was something very new to global science, and we're quite proud of that. Of course, this doesn't replace existing methods, but it does complement them. And then we also discovered certain interesting patterns which were, again, unexpected, but also contributed something new to our overall knowledge about the biology, ecology, and social structure of the species, because we discovered that we have this strange partitioning of dolphin social groups here, where the different social groups use the same area, but they don't use it at the same time. They basically share it based on time of day. And there's a lot of work that we're still continuing from that to better understand why that is. But it's very interesting because this hasn't been documented anywhere else in the world so far, where you actually have two distinct parts of a population sharing the same space, but using it at different times of day, which is quite remarkable and hasn't been documented in any dolphins, in any marine mammals, or any mammals globally so far, at least not published. So these are things that the science kind of scientifically, I think, made an impact. Education and awareness-wise, I think we have made an impact in Slovenia for sure, because, like I said, we started with nobody really knowing about dolphins around here, apart from a few fishermen and maybe some locals, but most locals used to tell us that they never see dolphins. So the overall awareness in Slovenia has changed, because there's still a lot of people who don't know about us or our work or dolphins here. But more and more, you actually come across people saying, "Oh yeah, I know about you guys. I know about your work. I know about dolphins. I know about this and that." So this, I think, is an impact at the national level that brought dolphins to the dolphins and marine biodiversity to some higher level agenda, let's say. And then finally, speaking of this agenda on a national level, Slovenia now actually does play an active role in various international agreements, reporting about dolphin population status here, actually also providing some funding for this type of work, which in the past was non-existent, but now there is. So this definitely changed. But then, of course, what we are mostly concerned about is what is our actual impact on the ground? How is our work changing something for the better? And this is often very difficult to assess on short timescales, because this is a long-term thing. However, one thing that we have achieved is that partly based on our work, based on our work, the Gulf of Trieste and neighboring waters were designated as a candidate important marine mammal area, the so-called EMAs. And then that information, together with the work carried out by our colleagues from Italy and Croatia, then was used to form what is called as the North Adriatic important marine mammal area. So the entire North Adriatic, based on also our work, is now designated as an important marine mammal area, which I think is a big step and something that we concretely contributed. This doesn't mean that this is a protected area. It just means that the biological community at the level of the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, considers this to be an important area for marine mammals based on science. And then a bit more, let's say, local, fine scale, which I think is equally important, or possibly even more important. Our work is now being used in combination with other work to potentially extend one of the local marine protected areas here in Slovenia. So there is the so-called landscape park Strunjan, which is both land and marine protected area. And our work on dolphins specifically has helped to prepare the so-called expert baselines to propose the expansion of this area. So our science is helping contribute to that.
That is a very high value.
I think so, and we hope so that this will lead into real world positive change.
So you would say that NGOs, like non-governmental organizations and societies, are important also for conservation?
I think definitely, and from different ways, because often people kind of throw NGOs in the same bucket, so to say. But you have very different NGOs that do very different work, also conceptually different work. We see ourselves as primarily science-based NGO and education-based NGO. We don't deal so much with lobbying or activism as such. And then you have NGOs that do that, and they don't do any science. And I think there's a place for both. So in that sense, I think yes, it is important, and different kinds of NGOs contribute to conservation, and I think they are making a difference. But also coming back to the science part, if you look at the Mediterranean, maybe it changed in the last 10 years or so, but for the past few decades, the majority of scientific information on whales and dolphins in the Mediterranean Sea didn't come from universities or research institutions. It came from scientific NGOs such as ours.
Interesting. And why did you decide to create a society, so in Slovenian, društvo, instead of organization?
What do you mean by organization? Because
there can be organizacija, so organization, or society as društvo, or we also have one zavod, let's say in Slovenian. So what would you say?
Yeah, so both društvo and zavod, both society and, let's say, institute, so to say, would both fall under organization. So it's just organization would be kind of the top category, let's say, and you have different forms of organizations. So society would be one form of organization. So we certainly are an organization. The reason why we went for the society is multifold. Partly, at the time, we still didn't really understand all the possibilities that you might go for. That's one thing. The so-called institute or zavod in Slovenian, it carries a bit more complication than a society, and it just felt more straightforward to go for a society or association. You could also call it in English. And it was also something that required, let's say, at least the beginning, the least amount of fuss and paperwork, so to say, because society is something that any a small number of interested citizens can, by law, create a society on specific goals or objectives, and that's what we did. So yeah, it was kind of probably just that, yeah. And there weren't too many other options, of course, at the time, right? None of us were, at the time at least, trained biologists or researchers. Like I said, I was still a high school student. I was 17 when we founded Morigenos. So I was not part of any university. I was not part of any research lab. So there was no option to start something that way. So society seemed like the most straightforward way.
One more technical question. You said that you have 6 employees now. How are you, like, are you self funded organization? You provide yourself with own funds, or you work with projects, or how do you have the opportunity to have 6 employees? Because this is huge for a society.
It's a mix of things, and the number six is actually a very recent number for the past 4 months, I believe. And our main source of funding now comes from European projects. Yes. At the beginning, it was very different. A lot of our funding came, or the majority of funding for our work came from membership, the so-called Adopt a Dolphin campaign, our summer research courses that we organized in the summer, where people could join and participate in our activities and join the research team. And that helped cover not the salaries, but the costs of fieldwork. Basically, this was even before any of us were employed. But through time, we became better at securing bigger European or national projects, and this is now our main source of funding. But it's always a bit of a struggle. I mean, this is never easy. You often don't know how you will make it through the next period. So it's not a secure position, so to say, by any stretch. But we somehow make it go.
That is also an impact for people, because they can actually be employed and do what they love. So it's really nice to hear that.
Yeah, this is, and you're right. And I forgot to mention that earlier, that one of the impacts here definitely is that we created new jobs basically here. So there are some people, local people, who are now working with us, who are not necessarily marine biologists. We also have people who are working in our education programs and project management. So our team consists of both scientists and non-scientists. And having 6 people employed on a thing that 20 years ago nobody thought even existed here, I think it's good progress.
Exactly, I think so too. You also did a Slovenian project for dolphins, which got a reward from Ford. So congratulations on that. I wanted to ask, how this project impacted, and what did bring good to the dolphins, to the nature conservation, and to the public.
So that project, that particular award was very early on in our story, let's say. Back in we got it in 2005, and the whole project is kind of part of the whole thing that we've been doing since the beginning until now. So everything we already talked about, the research and education that went alongside that research, we, from the very early on when we started our research activities, we kept a very active engagement in raising awareness of the public about what we do, because we want the public to understand what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and how they can help in the whole process, right? So we want the public to understand that our science isn't just a bunch of people going out on the boat and looking at some dolphins because they enjoy it. It's more than that. Our science is meant to provide a good evidence-based framework to to get a good understanding of the situation of the environment, of the population of dolphins and their interacting environment, what certain problems might be, and how we can use good science to address those problems. So even though our work focuses on dolphins, the overall conservation efforts are actually focusing on the marine ecosystem as a whole, much beyond just the dolphins. In this case, dolphins are just our study species because we can follow a lot of what's going on in the marine environment through dolphins. They're often called bioindicators because we can use them to indicate certain aspects of the environment. But they're also good, you could call it ambassador species for a number of reasons. They're referred to as flagship species because they're charismatic and they have the power to capturing the attention of the public and conveying messages of marine conservation through species like this. They're also what we call umbrella species because if we successfully manage to remove most of threats to dolphins in a given ecosystem, then by extension, we actually remove most of the threats affecting the entire marine ecosystem. And this is why we call them an umbrella species, because everything under their umbrella, so to say, gets protected. And this is partly because they're on the top of the marine food web, they live long, and they move around quite widely. So they're kind of a good proxy for the regional marine ecosystem. So I lost my plot a little bit, but anyway, so the point here was to combine good science and good education to go alongside that science. So we want the public to understand why this research is important, why conservation of not just dolphins but the entire marine ecosystem is important, and how everybody can make a difference in this. So this is kind of this is part of what the project that we got in the award for was focusing, and what we are still focusing on. So it's kind of a continuation of that.
Okay, so this was one of the first projects that you did, and it made a good impact. Okay.
Yes.
You also are a researcher in university in Primorska. How does this work look like, and what is your role in that?
Well, at the moment, my work there is primarily a teaching role. So I'm an assistant professor there, which means I currently hold two courses. One is called Conservation Ecology of Marine Mammals, and the other one is Multivariate Statistics in Ecology and Conservation. Both of those modules are elective modules, so they're optional. Students can choose them in a given year or not. So that's my primary role at the university. In the past, when I was a research assistant, I was also an assistant on various other courses, and also helping out with some some research work on sea turtles. So a lot of my past experience has also actually been on sea turtles, but my main focus has always been cetaceans, whales, and dolphins.
And why did you decide to go as a professor in this university and not just stick with the Morigenos?
It was a combination of things. One is that I do enjoy teaching, actually. I do like conveying knowledge and experience and ideas to others. And I enjoy working with students. That's part of the reason. Part of the reason is also because of my expertise that I gathered throughout the years, both on marine mammal ecology, but also on certain tools and skills like statistical modeling. There was also the interest from the university to have me teach those topics because they want students being taught different things by experts in those different things. So those two things are my expertise, and I can provide something useful to the university and the students through that.
Okay. Do you like it?
I do. Yeah, I enjoy teaching a lot.
Perfect. And you're also a president or a chairperson of European Cetacean Society. We already touched on this topic a little bit. What is the main reason or let's say role of this society? If you could touch on that.
So the European Cetacean Society is basically the largest gathering or largest collection of marine mammal professionals and enthusiasts.
Mhm.
It combines different researchers as well as students interested in this field. And the general aim of the society is to promote and expand on the science, knowledge, and conservation of marine mammals. And the main activity of the European Society, or ECS for short, is organizing annual conferences, scientific conferences, where people from all over Europe and even all over the world gather to present new research and new findings on different marine mammal species in different parts of the world. So the next one is happening just in over a month from now in Ponta Delgada in the Azores.
It's already the 36th conference, so it has a quite a long history already. And what is your role in this conference this year?
So at the moment, so last year I was elected as the chair of the ECS. So my role now is to lead the work of the ECS Council, or so-called the council, basically a board, so to say, that governs the society.
Mhm.
And at the moment, we are very busy together with the local organizing committee from the Azores to prepare and organize the conference, both in terms of logistics and the scientific program, etc.
Mhm. I know it's a hard question, but I want your opinion on how does this work in this European Cetacean Society impacts conservation of cetaceans, because it's the main for that.
So I think it impacts it in a number of ways. First of all, it's a forum for researchers to meet
Mhm.
and to, first of all, present new research to each other. So this is a way to let's say to disseminate knowledge that we all individually or by institutions, knowledge that we produce and we share it with our colleagues. So this is the first thing. And I believe that all good science contributes or has the capacity or potential to contribute maybe in the future to conservation. The more we know about different systems, the more we can look for solutions. The second part is that these conferences foster collaborations. So, often there is a certain conservation pressing problem that is often being addressed at these conferences, and sometimes new let's say new collaborative projects or new task groups are being formed at these conferences, which can then take forward these different conservation questions. And then finally, quite often the society itself addresses certain pressing conservation needs by actually issuing certain calls for actions or a letter from the society to various institutions. This can vary a lot, but it could be directed to a specific government or to the European Union, where we try to help to call for action or for some positive change, depending on the situation. So over the past years, the ECS has issued a number of such letters or calls, conservation letters. So I think these would be kind of how the conservation is impacted. But as I said, it's basically a gathering of professionals, and most of the time, then the actual conservation work on the ground then happens by these individual institutions, individual people, and so on. And the ECS is kind of a gathering of all of them.
Mhm. It's happening all every year, right?
That's right. It's happening yearly, apart from the COVID period, which kind of hampered that. But
Okay.
otherwise, yes, it's a yearly conference. So this year it will be basically the largest marine mammal related event in the world.
And if somebody wants to come that is not already invited, or a speaker or presenter, how can they come to this conference?
So the conference is not limited in terms of being invited. It's open to everybody. It's
Hmm.
open to both people who present stuff and those who don't. The deadlines for submitting abstracts for presentation, that's already gone, and
Yeah.
all the program of the conference is already done. But the registration or the participation itself is not limited. However, this is actually the first year where we do need to limit the amount of participation, simply because we had exceptionally high number of registrations this year, which surpassed anything in any of the previous 36 years. It's something we've never seen before.
Hmm.
There's always a bit of fluctuation in number of participants, and there's always a bit of a growth rate, let's say, throughout the years. And we always account for this, but this year it just spiked way up. So it's very likely that we might actually not be able to take all the people who would like to register, and it will
Hmm.
simply be on a first come first served basis.
Yeah, I was reading that on the web page because I was thinking of replying, and I was reading it today again, and I saw that it was so many people applied, which is actually really cool that so many people have interest in those kind of topics. So congratulations
Yeah,
on
in that,
that.
in
Yeah.
that sense, we are very happy that there is interest. At the same time, we are sad because we would like to welcome everybody, and it seems like we might not be able to. And
Hmm.
this is simply because the conference venue has its space limit, and we have to also keep up with the safety regulations and everything. So
Of course, yeah.
yeah.
You already touched on the topic I wanted to ask you about, and it's about working NGOs working together and sharing knowledge, working on some projects together. How important do you think this is, and how well established it is in the research area, and how could we make this even more?
I think it's vital because we know that we as a single research group can only cover so much area, so
Mhm.
much time, and so much of the work. And then also we know that Europe and Mediterranean in particularly is a small Mediterranean is a relatively small enclosed sea, Adriatic even more, that is shared by many countries. And we know that marine ecosystems are basically borderless. These animals, as we've seen from our own research and research by other colleagues, these animals move across borders all the time. So they're not Slovenian dolphins, they're not Italian dolphins, they're not Croatian dolphins. They're using the waters of all of these three countries sometimes on a daily basis. So from that point alone, it's important that countries collaborate and that the research institutions and NGOs from those countries collaborate. And we do. I think overall, it can always be improved, but overall, I think the collaborative effort in the Mediterranean region and Europe is actually really good.
Hmm.
And we all work regularly with colleagues from Italy, from Croatia, from other parts of the Mediterranean Sea and Europe. So I do think this is vital. Like I said, it can always be improved through different ways. But for example, yeah, just having an open mind and good spirits is one way to achieve that. Because if people kind of get along and are open to collaboration, then many more opportunities arise.
Hmm.
And then, like we touched on already, conferences, like we just spoke about, are also a way for people to meet in person, to discuss ideas. And actually, quite a few of my collaborators now, my study collaborators, I met through these conferences.
Perfect. um I also wanted to ask you about the whales and dolphins. How are they doing right now here in Slovenia and in the world in general? How are they numbers? Are they increasing, decreasing? um Yeah, in general.
So if we start here in Slovenia, I would say they are doing relatively okay. Our data and our analysis of those data over the past years indicate that the population here it seems relatively stable. So there's no evidence of any increase and there's no evidence of any decrease. Now, I have to caveat that by saying that detecting decreases and increases in marine mammal populations is incredibly difficult. This is partly due to the fact that it's difficult to study these animals. They live out in the sea, which is an alien environment to us. We are dependent on good weather. These animals spend, depending on the species, but between 70 to 90% of their time underwater, usually at some distance from shore. So it's not easy to study them. But also they live long and they reproduce slowly. So detecting any meaningful changes is difficult, and sometimes you might even have a population decline before you're able to detect it. However, having said that, it seems that that the population here is relatively stable. It seems. Now, when we talk about the world, however, it's very dependent on the species and area. Some species are doing really well, and are even some species are also recovering from the past depletions. For example, whaling in the past has decimated many populations and species of whales, but a few of them, like the North Atlantic humpback whales, have recovered quite spectacularly and are now very abundant in the North Atlantic. And this is a success story where after the whaling was stopped, the population recovered. But some other species haven't recovered, unfortunately. For example, the North Atlantic right whales, they haven't recovered. And even though in the past the main problem was whaling, now their main problem is ship strikes and getting caught in fishing gear.
Yeah.
So the whaling brought down the population, but now these other threats are preventing it from rebound and actually depleting it further. So this is a problem. So it's very variable both by species, but also by population. So if we come back to bottlenose dolphins that live here, bottlenose dolphins at the species level globally are doing fine. They are what we call least concern at the IUCN Red List classification system. But then you might have a species that is globally doing fine, but you might have certain local populations which are not doing fine. And there are certain so-called subpopulations of bottlenose dolphins in some parts of the world which are critically endangered. And then if I go back to the species level, there are certain species which are actually critically endangered at the level of the species, which means that we are very close to losing them as a species forever. And once that happens, there's no way back, of course.
Yeah.
We
Can you
lose
name some of them?
Sorry?
Can you name some of them that are critically endangered?
So the most critically endangered cetacean in the world at the moment is the so-called vaquita. It's a small species of porpoise living in the upper Gulf of California in Mexico. And it's not looking good, although this species has been shown to be surprisingly resilient. And the problem here is that the problem is not complex. We know exactly what's killing them. It's bycatch in fishing gear. It's very specific kind of fishing gear. And it's only happening in one country. So in theory, this shouldn't be difficult to manage. It's not politically complex in terms of different countries. It's not threat-based complex. It's not like lots of different things are affecting them. There's only about 10 or so of them left. So it's really a really dire situation.
Okay.
And then the next in line is probably the Atlantic humpback dolphin, which is actually a species that I happen to work on quite a lot in the past few years. And this is a species that is endemic only to the Western Africa. So you don't find them anywhere else than West Africa. And this is only from about Morocco down to Angola. So you don't find them in northern Morocco. You only find them in the south or in the Western Sahara. and then as you go south, you find them as south as Angola. You don't find them in Namibia. You don't find them in South Africa, and they are restricted to a very narrow stretch of coastal waters. You don't find them in the open ocean. You don't find them around oceanic islands. They're really very, very coastal, and they're mainly getting killed by bycatch in fishing gear. So
Hmm.
that's looks like the next kind of species in line. So those would be some examples, and then there are some other examples at, like I said, at the subpopulation level and so on. And there is one species of cetacean called the bycatch that we all pretty much agree is extinct because of human activities. So
Hmm.
this was a species of a river dolphin that lived in the Yangtze River in China, and that one was a complex story because it lived in a system where basically everything you could throw at a species was basically thrown at it. There were bycatching fishing gear, traffic, boat strikes, the construction of dams on the river, pollution, underwater noise. Everything you can basically think of was kind of being thrown at that species.
Hmm.
And back in 2006, I believe, it was declared as functionally extinct. So even if there might be some individuals somewhere left alive that we don't know of, the species as a whole is gone, and nobody has seen a live specimen in 20 years now. So
Hmm.
we
Okay.
considered it as extinct.
Yeah. And also for the humpback whales that you were mentioning before, do you think it has a bottleneck effect on them if they were so widely caught as like for as yeah as fish basically, even though they came back, can it have an impact, and how would you find out about that?
Do you mean like a genetic bottleneck?
Yes.
Well, it's a good question, and it doesn't seem that, at least in humpbacks, they weren't depleted to such small levels. As far as I'm aware, I would need to ask some of my geneticist friends working on humpbacks, but I believe that the bottleneck was never reached in humpbacks.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue that the bottleneck should be reached in the vaquita in
Mm-hmm.
Mexico because of such dramatically small number. But even there was some research that suggested, I don't remember the specifics, but basically uh, that the species, even genetically, is remarkably resilient to even low population size, and that the let's say that the genetic diversity is actually still remarkably high despite that. And
Okay.
there were some examples of some other species. I think the California condor, which is a vulture species, I think they showed there that even though it was reduced to drastically small population size, it could rebound and still being genetically, let's say, healthy, so to say. Um, I think this depends highly on species. I'm not a geneticist, but from
Yeah.
what I understand, I think it depends highly on species and the mutation rates in those species and how resilient they are to that. So some research suggests that even when you have really, really small population size, the genetic bottlenecks might not be the reason why you would dismiss it and say, "Oh, there's no point. They're done anyway." They can
Mm-hmm.
actually rebound, it seems.
It's interesting because I would say that 10 individuals are like, you know, done,
Yeah.
if you say so. Because I don't know, in Slovenia we have lynx population and we have 30 of them right now in Slovenia, approximately. And it is seen on the population, even
Mhm.
though of new individuals coming from Romania and Slovakia and so on. So I don't know, maybe California has a special effect on animals that it doesn't.
Maybe, yeah. Um, it was also shown that I think with the vaquita that the animals that did survive tend to be especially resilient animals. So those that
Mhm.
are now there seem to either be smarter or they have learned about the dangers of gill nets, and there is some glimmer of hope that maybe whatever is left is now the most resilient animals, which might either through knowledge and culture and social learning, or through just genetics and the gene pool, lead to their offspring also potentially being more resilient. So yeah, time will tell whether that's
Yeah.
the case, but that's a small glimmer of hope for the species which otherwise has kind of been discounted already years ago.
Mm. Well, we hope for the best. And what about ship strikes? Because I know this is a significant problem for a lot of whale and dolphin species, especially whales. Um, how to tackle that?
Well, again, this is a problem which is very variable depending on the area and the species.
Mm,
Um, and you're right, for especially for certain large whale species, it's a big problem. And it species like fin whales and sperm whales seem to be the most affected, as well as right whales, depending on the area. And these are animals who, historically or evolutionary speaking, they were the biggest guys in the sea, right?
mm,
Nothing, there was nothing that could run them over, so to say. But now we have these massive and fast ships, which are, they don't have evolutionary mechanisms to kind of defend against that, let's say. And the problems are multifold. Sometimes the problem is simply the sheer density of that traffic, and the more density of something you have, the more difficult it is to avoid it.
mm,
It's the same like crossing a busy square in town. If it's empty, it's very easy to avoid people. If it's crowded because you're on a concert, let's say, you're very likely to bump into somebody just because of the effect of the density. Another problem is that sometimes the sound of these vessels tends to be loudest at the back where the engines are, and these vessels tend to be quite
mm,
long and large. So one of the theories, or I think even empirical data show that there's a relatively silent space in front of those vessels, so the whales might not even hear them, or by the time they hear them, it's already too late.
mm,
There's a number of ways to tackle against that, and sometimes it's a bit of a conundrum, because we want ships to be quieter because they introduce underwater noise into the marine environment, and this is also causing a problem for whales.
mhm,
At the same time, we would like the whales to hear them. In terms of mitigation, a number of ways exist, and some of them have been proven really good. One is having a reduction in speed. So we know
mhm,
that the slower the ships go, the less likely they are to hit a whale. And if they hit a whale, the less likely they are to kill it.
mhm,
So in certain high density areas of whales, there are either mandatory or voluntary speed restrictions that the ship owners can abide by.
mhm.
This is one way. That doesn't mean that they always have to travel slow, but in certain areas it would make sense that they travel slower.
Yeah.
And there's a way for them to shift shipping lanes, and this has also been shown to work in some areas where, and this is where the research comes in, right? Where good research has shown that a specific area is highly important for the whales, and the whales really hang out there all the time. But the same area happened to be the area of the main shipping route coming through. So lots
Mhm,
of whales
mhm,
were being killed. But based on this information, the science showed that if you move the shipping lane sometimes just by a few nautical miles, you might drastically reduce the likelihood of coming across whales. And at the same time, for the ship owners, it didn't really make a big difference or any difference sometimes in transit times, in the amount of time it took them to reach their destination, and by extension also on the costs of fuel, right? So this is the example of good science that can work. So
mhm,
we know
mhm,
what the problem is, we know which areas should be avoided, what we need to do to reduce the likelihood of killing whales, And does that reduction actually have a big negative effect on the industry? Maybe yes, but maybe no. So these are some examples of these mitigations. And then there's also like real-time responses where you have, at least in certain areas, onboard observers on ships and trying to react real time. If there's a whale sighted, the ship can either change course or slow down. So these are the main mitigation methods that I can think of. But then, having said that, we just mentioned that the big ships are a problem for large whales.
Mm-hmm.
And often people ask us, well, what about dolphins here in the Gulf of Trieste? Because this is also an area where with really high shipping traffic, because we have two big ports, Koper and Trieste. And I think, and this is partly based on evidence, but partly based on just hunch, well, informed hunch, let's say, that these big ships are probably less of a problem for dolphins because, first of all, they're quite fixed in the routes. They're always in the same area.
Mm-hmm.
They're low frequency sounding, which means the dolphins can hear them from far away. They're easy to avoid, and they also don't overlap directly with the main frequency used by the dolphins, but they are overlapping with the frequency used by the whales. And finally, I think for the dolphins here, the bigger problem are the small recreational craft that we see in the summer.
Yeah.
So yachts, speedboats, also sailing boats, but mainly speedboats, which here in the summer are very, very numerous.
Yeah.
They tend to be quite fast. They are unpredictable in their movement patterns, and they produce sounds which are generally of higher frequencies, which are directly overlapping with the frequency used by the dolphins. So at least in summer, that kind of traffic is, I think, more problematic for the dolphins than big shipping. So it's really always quite complex, really depends on the species you're referring to, the area, and so on. And the same actually applies to fisheries. Not all fisheries is equally bad for all things. Certain fisheries are much more destructive for certain aspects of the marine ecosystem, but might be less dangerous for certain species within it.
So basically, good knowledge and good research done and presented to the governments and the ones that are making the shots would be the best way to go to deal with those topics and to
I
help
think
the
I believe so, and this is kind of the premise we are operating on, and trying to use good science to help decision makers and the local government and local authorities and national authorities to take good decisions based on good science.
So would
And
you
also,
say,
at the same time, educate the public about all that things, so that it happens on two levels: on the bottom up, let's say, the public doing their part, but also top down for the governments using the best available data to make decisions. Whether or not that happens is debatable. It's not always the case, but that's the idea.
so would you say that the future is bright for the cetaceans in Slovenia and in the world?
I mean, depends how you look at it. There's definitely lots of stuff going horribly wrong that can easily make you depressed. However, I'm kind of like a, what you say, incorrigible optimist. If I wasn't optimistic about stuff, I wouldn't be doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
So I am overall optimistic, and even though there are certain steps we take backwards as a global society, there are many steps we are taking forwards. And even though some species and some examples are really depressing because they're getting worse, we shouldn't forget about the good example cases of success stories where it does work, where good science and good conservation does work, and we have prevented extinctions of certain species. So yeah, I think it's a mix.
And I could agree that if you work with conservation, you have to be an optimist, because otherwise you just get depressed.
Yeah, I always say to people, like, try not to lose your humor in all this.
Yeah, basically it helps. You were also a part of a research. How do you say odprave?
Expedition.
Expedition. Thank you. In Pitcairn Islands, where you were doing research on humpback whales. Um, could you maybe describe shortly how this work was done and what was your part? If maybe you have already some tangible evidence of your research and so on.
So Pitcairn Islands are a very difficult place because they are one of the most remote places in the world. It's Pitcairn Island itself is a tiny, tiny island surrounded by Southern Pacific Ocean. And by the way, this is the island where the mutineers on the Bounty, there is this famous story of the mutiny on the ship Bounty.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the mutineers actually took refuge at and lived for many years. So the majority of the islanders there are actually direct descendants after many generations of those original mutineers. And so I was very lucky to be invited to be part of the expedition that was led by the King's College London in the UK. So I was invited as the cetacean expert, and through their prior work there, it was shown that humpback whales seem to be using those island waters for giving birth and raising calves. And the interesting part is that this seems to be a relatively recent occurrence, because if you talk to the locals, they will tell you that they basically don't have any collective recollection of whales being there prior to 1990s. And then they started appearing, and then in the maybe last 10 or 15 years, they started appearing more prominently. And now you see them regularly every year. So part of what we were trying to do there is to find out where do these whales belong to, like which population, because it's not clear what their population identity is. So trying to determine, are they their own thing, or are they part of some known population, presumably the French Polynesia population, or are they part of some other population, or like I said, their own thing that we just haven't known about.
Mm-hmm.
And understand how many whales are using those waters, and then trying to understand where they fit into based on photo ID that we talked about, based on genetics, and based on whale song, because humpback whales produce this song that is very specific to a given population. And you can actually, by analyzing the patterns of this song, you could actually link where these whales might belong to in terms of population structure. So these are the three ways we're trying to determine that. So in 2023 and last year, we went there to Pitcairn for 10 days to try to get some information on that. But in terms of some tangible results, we do have now quite a bit of photo ID data, and we have matched some of the whales to certain areas, a few in French Polynesia, and I think one even to Eastern Australia, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Nice.
And we managed to get some tissue samples for genetic studies. This is still ongoing, and it's not many samples because it's very difficult to work there. Like I said, it's a very remote place. It took me 5 days to get there and 5 days to get back, to spend 10 days there. So I'm basically away for 3 weeks, but I'm only on the island for about 10 days. And because it's a tiny island surrounded by a massive ocean, there is really no shelter from the prevailing winds or waves. So unless you have really good conditions, you can't really get out to sea easily. So it's definitely a work in progress, and it's very small steps because it's such a difficult place to work in and so difficult to get to.
Interesting. And would you say that you got this role to be part of this expedition because of your previous work in Morigenos and in European Cetacean Society, or how did this happen? Because it's an honor to be working in such an environment on such a project.
It's a huge honor, yes, and I consider myself very lucky. Very lucky. I still don't know how they got to me. I mean, I kind of know somebody recommended me to help these guys to train them and to go there to obtain biopsy samples from these whales. Biopsies are basically tissue samples that we obtain from whales. And so the lead person, a professor working on this project, he came to Piran a few years ago to get some training by us. And then when they got another project to go and study these whales there again, he reached out and invited me to come along. So I think it's again, I think a mix of technical skills and expertise, but also knowing people and people enjoying to work with each other. And I think it's a combination of all these things, because the nicest thing is to work with people that you like working with, of course. And so I was very lucky in that respect, indeed.
Amazing. I'm happy for you that you got this part.
Thank you.
And I hope to see some more research done on that and read about it.
Thank you.
Do you also have some dreams, goals, or visions for the future, for yourself, for your personal work?
I mean, yes is the short answer. There's many things we as a group would like to do, to achieve. We have achieved quite a few of those things, but there's lots of things we would like to continue, of course. There's lots of scientific questions that we are trying to answer about these dolphins, about dolphins elsewhere and whales. Goals to do with education. So, for example, the Dolphin Center, the education center we have here, our goal is to expand the activities of that to reach as wide of a base of people as possible, to partly to also showcase that Piran and these areas here are more than just restaurants, beaches, and sun. That there's actually a rich, not only cultural heritage here, but also very rich natural heritage. So it's a complex question, I guess. It's a simple question, but a complex one at the same time. Not one I can easily answer in a short answer, but lots of things on my own, but also our collective to-do lists.
Perfect. So it's gonna be busy.
Always is, yes. But we like it that way.
Perfect. Is there anything you could advise to a person who wants to work with marine mammals or in marine biology and doesn't know how to tackle it or how to start?
Yeah, I think it would be very similar to what I was saying before. Just be curious, be interested. Obviously, read about stuff. There's now getting knowledge is easier than ever nowadays. So reading stuff, getting involved in things on the ground, like trying to volunteer on projects, even in projects that offer paid, payable positions like courses and things like that, are an excellent opportunity. It's also a way for people to get a flavor of this work, to even see if this is for them. Go somewhere for 10 days or 2 weeks and see what a life of a whale or dolphin research actually looks like. People might discover that it's maybe more difficult than they thought. It's not all just, let's go out on the boat and look at some dolphins. We are sometimes frying in the sun, which in tolerable heat, or sometimes freezing in winter, because we also do winter field work. And sometimes you might spend hours at sea trying to find your study species, and you don't find them. This was the case for us here. This was the case for us in West Africa. It's not easy to work, so this might be a way for people to actually see, this is definitely for me, or maybe actually this isn't really for me, right? And then, like we said before, conferences are a great way, because you, in a very condensed way, in a short time, you get an overview of all this wide research that people are doing, which might help you kind of see which direction you might want to go with your own research, what kind of stuff interests you. You see which people are doing what kind of stuff, and then
Mhm.
you get to meet these people. You can interact with them, and that can lead to certain collaborations, maybe a student project, maybe somebody needs a student to help with some research. You might be a student looking for an opportunity to do your bachelor or master thesis, and some research institutions might have an opportunity for that. So it's a mix of those things. But I would say, yeah, trying to learn as much. I mean, it sounds cliche, but it's true. Just trying
Mm,
to learn as much as you can, trying to get as much experience as you can, and uh, and then take it from there, I would say.
perfect. Thank you. Um, yeah, now I forgot about it. There was one more question that popped up while you were talking, regards to the topic that you were discussing, but maybe I'll remember it. Um, for now, thank you, and I wish you all the best with your current and ongoing projects and
Thank
the
you.
goals that you still have. You said that you have plenty of them, and it's never boring. So I hope that works. Thank you for having this conversation with me. So, is there anything else you would like to share, or final words?
Um, well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I always say, we are total whale and dolphin geeks, and we love talking about this stuff. So it's always a pleasure. I would say, yeah, just we should just keep in mind that this kind of stuff isn't about just the species we studied, but it's a bit wider, and we need species form part of these ecosystems, and we need good ecosystems also for ourselves, for humans. So even if you look at these things from a completely selfish point of view, we as humans should take better care of our environment than we do. And yeah, I would suggest, let's not forget that we can all contribute our part, basically.
I can't agree more. So amen to that. Yeah, I remembered. I definitely agree with trying different things and just seeing if that works for you. Because I was in Iceland, freezing cold on the sailboat every day, and I was also in Azores working. It was hot, sunny, then it was windy, rough. So all the conditions that could be, but I loved it. At that point, I was just all the time saying to myself, "What a life and what an opportunity I have to be working with whales and dolphins." So I was really happy about it. So I want to do more of that. I'm just trying to find my ways through that. So I definitely agree with you. Just try to do as much as possible, learn as much as possible, and connect to people. So
Yeah, and if I may add to that, it's also a way for people to, like we just said, to find out what makes them tick, what works for them. But also, I was referring to formal and non-formal education
mhm.
previously, right? And people can get involved in this kind of work on a variety of levels. You might be a research scientist that goes to pursue your master's, your PhD, or what not. And this is certainly one feasible path, but it's not the only path. There are people who might not be, let's say, scientific minds, so to say. They might not be good at data crunching or things, but they might be excellent in the field. They might be excellent at spotting the animals, or being around animals, or having a feel for how the animals are behaving. And those people can be excellent field workers even if they don't have scientific training, or things like that. Somebody might be a really good communicator or educator, and they can do their part that way. So uh, yeah, just to emphasize that it's not only one mode that we all need to fit into.
Exactly. I agree. I almost didn't ask you, but I will still ask you because it's a part of this podcast. It is quite a similar question than the one I just asked you, but what would you advise to somebody who wants to live their dream but is maybe afraid of doing it or doesn't know how to, in general, not in related to marine science?
Huh. Yeah. Of course, I'm judging this from my own personality and my own experience, but I tend to be quite persistent in things. Like I said, I'm quite overall an optimist. Um, and yeah, people also often, this is also kind of the general mantra that you hear in many places, that you often regret things that you didn't do rather than the things you did do, right?
Yeah.
So I would say it's hard to give a generic advice because everybody's situation is so different. But one thing I also discovered in my own journey is that sometimes when you're faced with two decisions, it might be that one of them is based on fear and one of them is based on what you really want, but it's being prevented by that fear. And I was in such a situation, and then I decided that I didn't want to make a choice based on fear, and it worked out good for me, at least. Again, this will depend on everybody's situation. Everybody's situation is different, but I'm sorry, I can't give a more concrete answer, but I
I'm
hope this helps.
actually very satisfied with this answer, because I believe that the person that needs to hear it will hear it. So I think it will work for the ones that need to hear it.
Very good. Thank you.
So thank you for having this conversation again, and see you next time.
Thank you. See you.
Bye bye.
Bye.